If you know it, you run for office.
So are you about ready, Francis?
I'm ready.
Okay, so my name is Jill, and I'm the president of the Morristown Historical Society, and I've been affiliated with the Morristown Historical Society about 6 or 7 years now. And by far, the public event with the hugest turnout was Francis Favreau slideshow in the barn on a summer night, standing room only. And so we knew tonight, a winter event, middle of the week, we wouldn't maybe have standing room, but I suspected that perhaps we would, and we do. So that's fantastic. So those of you who are here, you probably know or think of Francis as the official Morristown historian, even if that's not his official title, it should be. I've lived in Morristown about 10 years, and I hadn't been here very long at all before somebody, I think it was my mother-in-law Claire, clued me into the fact that anything I wanted to know about the history of town, I should ask Francis. So I started walking in the Pleasant View Cemetery, and there was a gravestone there that I liked, just a little girl's first name, no last name, and I was curious about that stone. So I asked Francis, I said, it's sort of near a family plot, but it's off, do you know who it belonged to? And sure enough, he called me back with the name and the death date and the whole story. And then I bought a house in the village, just a little rickety house on a dead-end street. But I said, Francis, any chance you have any old pictures of my new house? And about the next day, he walked up George Street with some pictures of my house and gave them to me. And then just last month, an out-of-state researcher contacted me with a question about the bijou and the woman who had owned the bijou in the 1920s and a legal dispute that involved the infamous filmmaker D.W. Griffith. And I didn't know the answer, but I said, well, I bet Francis knows something about it. So I forwarded that to Francis, and sure enough, he returned a reply with all sorts of information from the News and Citizen about the bijou and that woman that allowed the researcher to get started on that project. So Francis has published on the Copley Hospital. He's transcribed, is it the whole run of the News and Citizen?
Well, part of it.
Part of it. He has a huge collection of photographs, which he shared. He shares all his material with all of us, which is fantastic. He's co-authored sort of an updated history of Morrisville, right? More contemporary than Morristown 2 times. And many of you probably know Morristown 2 times. So Francis is really active in our community, and we think of him as our town historian. And so we welcome him, and thanks for giving a talk tonight. You want to get the lights, Francis? I'm not sure the light switch is located.
Right here?
Yeah.
I'm guiding one.
Alexander Hamilton Copley. I think most of you do know most everything about him. Interestingly enough, we're talking about the beginning of Morristown in 1790, and here we are in 1890 when the village was incorporated. A lot of people look at this picture and think the interesting thing is up on the left-hand side, you see the old log cabin, and then you see the new one on this side over here. And this is actually the Morrisville house. This is where Alexander Copley was actually born, in this house here. And soon after he was born, his father went out west, and interestingly enough, there was an Indian raid on the town he was in, and he got killed. And Alexander Copley actually was born here. His mother died when he was 10 years old. He was brought up by some relatives, family up in Elmore, and from there on he went out and carried on. He actually went, he got his learning as a pharmacist in Morrisville, and he had a pharmacy in Hyde Park. Didn't stay there very long, went to Boston, went in the Boston area, and started out as a pharmacist, developed about 55 or 56 different pharmacies down there, then dealt in real estate, and his wife died after 20 years of marriage, and the rest of the story is pretty much what you know back here. This is an interesting photograph here because of the so-called trailer in the front of the Morrisville house. Actually, it was Foster's building that he carried around with a horse and took pictures with. And you can see the top of the building, top of the trailer actually opens up and it's a window. And it was faced so that the sun would shine in. And the people that had pictures, the only way he'd take your picture is if you had dark clothes on. If you had light clothes on, it didn't show up. So you had to have some type of dark clothing in order to be able to have the picture taken. And this here is a picture of the Randall Hotel. And the Morrisville house was actually moved back and became a section of this Randall Hotel on Congress Street. And of course you have the Centennial Building. And this here is the means of transportation at the time. I believe Max Payne's, was it your grandfather that used to drive that, Max?
Yes, Bixby, when he started.
Mr. Bixby used to drive this from there to Waterbury and back. Here's the Randall Hotel about 1950. You can see it beginning to sag just a little bit. A lot of people didn't realize that there was actually two food stores, the Pleasing Store and the Grand Union in this building. And this is, once again, another picture of a color photograph of that area, the Grand Union, the Pleasing Store. And you're going to see beside it, down the road, you'll see we called it, at the time it was called the Courier Place, but the News and Citizen actually was there, and the Kelly block, and you'll see another picture of this shortly. Here in 1958, they're beginning to tear the building down. McMahon bought the building and decided to tear it down. This is what used to be on the corner, one of the filling stations quite a few years back. The gas price was just a little different.
Is that where Cumberland Farms is now?
That's where Cumberland Farms is right now. This is what's on the corner where the Randall Hotel used to be. This is quite evident. And we're going back, here's the Randall Hotel again, but there was another interesting thing about this. There's the Morrisville house, or the Hotel Morrisville, is in the middle of this picture. And if you look closely, you'll be able to see Kelly's house, which is between the Randall Hotel, the Courier, and I should be able to show the next picture here. I think the next picture will show there's the Courier Place, and there's the house, the Kelly Place that Sonny DeMar has moved up to, up on Fire Avenue where Ben Larish lives there now, I believe. He moved that up there. That was an interesting move because of the years ago there was a lot of houses that were moved, but there wasn't any telephone lines and so on and so forth, so it wasn't a problem. This was a rather interesting move because of the telephone lines. But that was the Morrisville Messenger building there also. This is what's there now. This is the future of Morrisville. I like the Mansfield at the top up there. I like that overhead railway too. I think that's rather interesting. And this is we're way back in the early 1900s here, and these houses were built and added and changed and modified, and at the end of the street is actually a filling station, and then you've got the present buildings that are there, even though they don't look like this at the present time.
What street is that?
This is on Lower Main Street. And this little restaurant right here, whoops, pulled the wrong button here. I wanted to go back one if I can. That little restaurant is actually stuck right in between these buildings here, but you can't. For the longest time, I tried to figure out what that was, and one day, the Hutchins house burned on Hutchins Street, what we call the Hutchins house, and it turns out that one of their relatives actually were the ones that, going too fast for myself here. One way or the other, we'll get there. There we go. She ran that restaurant. She lived, some of the relatives lived in Essex Junction, and they gave me, sent this picture up to me to show that that was the restaurant that was there at the time, which I never realized it was, but you could just barely see it in the other photograph. This is the Avalon Hotel. Interestingly enough, this is Thompson's flower shop on at the present. And that's what was the Avalon Hotel at the time. And there's the Avalon Hotel itself on the left-hand side. I like that car there. That's a rather interesting one. And once again, this is what it used to look like. It looks a little different now since they've torn down the shampoo grove. But there's the Avalon Hotel. It was in the 70s that was redone. And interestingly enough, for some reason or other, a lot of these buildings started out without this front face on them. And later on, for some reason or other, they put faces, this square face on a lot of the buildings in the village. Some of them still have it there. And of course, this is looking up from Lower Main Street. Once again, you've got the, I don't know if a lot of you remember when there used to be a, oh good Lord, at that,
Locker.
the lockers we used to be down here, yes. This is across the street from Arthur's store. This was called the Doty Block, and this is a better picture of it. And the top is rather, the wording is rather interesting because you've got up here caskets, and you've got, there's a little of everything in that building. And it says caskets and robes, coffins, furniture, groceries, carpets. And this is about what it would look like inside at the time. I don't know how you could find anything or walk through it or anything else, but nevertheless, if you wanted it, it was in there, I'm sure, as it looks of things. And of course, this is the so-called Munson block, which you're familiar with because Mr. Bournes are in it now. That car there in the front actually belonged to Walter Jones, Bob Jones's father. Matter of fact, that car is still, it's been revamped and it's still in use today. This was an interesting slide because Main Street used to have gas pumps all over the place. McMahon's had this building here, and they actually, this was one of the first buildings where the vehicles actually would drive inside, and they had an inside showroom. That was the first inside showroom of Morrisville, and McMahon's started out there, and then they moved up and bought the Randall Hotel, tore that down, and they had the store there and so forth.
Francis, where's that building?
That building is the one it's beside the Munson block. It's on that same area, in that same area. Let me see if I can go back there to it. It's not letting me go back. That building was right, that building you were looking at was right in this area here. Presently, that was Ron Terrell's gas station. Texaco station, rather. There he is himself. Anybody know who the other gentleman is? I don't recognize him.
Which one is Ron? The guy with the
On
hat?
the left.
The one without the hat.
One without the hat.
It's not Francis. Oh, there we go.
Okay. This picture here shows the original bank. This was the original bank building here. There's a little house right here, which is presently the Breyer Place. That house was moved about 4 times. It used to be up on the corner at one time. When they built this building, they moved it down there. Later on, and I've given you a insert of the moved houses, so you can read all about that different houses that were moved in town. And some of them were moved 2, 3, 4 times. And that building, that one there has been moved around a few times. And once again, this is just showing the Munson block and the other houses that were up through there, and some of them got burned and some got moved to make room for what is presently there now. You're all familiar with Arthur's store, of course. I don't know if you remember Lord, who used to run his business out in the back there, Marco's TV. And there, once again, is that corner shop of the Morrisville Messenger, of the News and Citizen, and the Kelly blog. This here is taken down from looking up towards the museum and towards the TIF block, what we call the TIF block. This was on the corner where the police station is.
What happened to that?
Eaton Brothers Plumbing.
Is it torn down?
Oh, yeah, that's gone, of course, because the police department, the police building is there on that corner now. This is Jim himself standing by his gas pump on that corner. This was the way the original noise house looked like. You'll notice that there's, instead of two, there's four dormers on the back side of the house. And originally, this house wasn't brick. And this was a rather interesting picture of the wagon he's got. I don't know if he was a fisherman or what he was, but nevertheless, he was ready for whatever came along. The water was high, they made it just the same. And notice the porch. This once again is the noise house. And here we are, still later on in life. And here is the picture from down the street. Notice the three chimneys on there's actually four chimneys on the noise house. And I'm sure that most of you have probably been through it, but that house had to have stoves in different rooms in order to keep it warm during the winter time. By the looks of things, there was smoke coming out of it most of the time, I guess. And there's this was the original TIF block that was on that corner, and there's the building beside it used to be a creamery. And in the old history, it talks about going down Feline Avenue. Well, it took a while to figure out where Feline Avenue was, but actually, the creamery was there, and all the cats used to gather down on the street down to the creamery to get milk, and they called it Feline Avenue for a while. A lot of the streets were named differently than what they are presently now. Park Street was called Wilkins Street. Congress Street was Elm Street. Bridge Street was Cottage Street. There was a street going by the present bank, going where 2020 is, that was called Bank Street. So the streets are all different. They were named differently from time to time, and that's why it was difficult to figure out how wide they were and so on and so forth. Once again, there's the TIF block. I'm sure a lot of you can remember what that was like.
Didn't that have another name though?
Parkview.
Parkview.
Also called the bullpen.
The bullpen was something different. I'll just show you that in a minute. This was after the fire. And once again, this is looking up from the fifth block or Parkview. This is real early.
Francis, when you say tip block, is that the one that goes down by the waterfall?
This side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that's the view after it burned. Looks a little different there. You see the island. The island, actually, before the 1924, before they built the dam, that island in the middle was actually owned by a person. And when they had quite a time, because when they built the dam, he decided that he didn't need it, he couldn't use it anymore, so he sold it to the village. They were glad to have it, because they actually built, before the 24 dam was built, there was a dam on both sides of that island. And I think we'll have a picture of it here something before long. This is the dam below what we call A Street now, A Street and B Street. And you'll notice there was a rock here called Pulpit Rock. It was a massive column of stone. Eventually it fell in the river, but they used to talk about Pulpit Rock. And the fiber mill was down around the corner on B Street. It was a fiberboard factory. The thing that always amazed me is the size of these buildings. They were enormous in size. And we talk about building buildings today, but they built some big, enormous buildings back then. And this shows you the complex number of dams that were before. You have the regular dam, the present, then you've got the bridge, the old bridge that goes across, and you've got another series of dams coming down. And they said that between the high spot and the low spot at the bottom of that river, the high spot, there was a 100-foot drop, and that was the beauty of it was they were able to use the water to generate electricity, also to use the water for the wheelhouse to turn the different factories. There used to be a butter factory down there. There was a sawmill, and they used the water as a source of power to do all the work that they did. This was after the 27 flood, and it's interesting that when they obviously built it quite well, because that they still used the same support that they had back then. There's the bridge again over the top. This is in later years. It's getting sort of dilapidated. There wasn't much room to go across the bridge. That bridge actually was originally, when you came years ago, before the Bridge Street Bridge was built, when you come down Brooklyn Street, you used to go straight down through, and you'd come out across this bridge here and go onto the Stowe Road to get to Stowe. And after the 27 flood, of course, things changed dramatically. That's what it looks like today. And if you stand on the bridge and look down, you'll notice the remnants of the old, another section of the dam that you saw previously, and that's part of it right there. And this is once again looking down that path. And shows the dam itself, the island, and there's a dam on both sides. And they had a sluice that went down through here that powered all the different buildings. You had a water wheel there, and they channeled the water from the dam into that wheel to generate the power to do the business in their buildings. And here, once again, it shows the island and the dam on both sides. What does that look like? Actually, that's Main Street, that's Portland Street. And you'll notice on the right here is the corner building. That was actually a 3-story building. And someone asked me, why did they have the fences up? Well, the horses used to get excited, and they used to run through, and the people on the corner in back of the building actually had a garden out there. And the horses would get into them, so they had fences on both sides. And they actually had a sidewalk, and the sidewalks were across the street had regular boards, just regular boards so that they could walk across. And this here is actually, this building right here is the present Starfire.
Yeah.
And you'll notice this picture here doesn't have the square front on the front of it. It just has the regular roof set up. And there's an interesting thing about these old photographs that took a while to understand. Is when they took these pictures, there was no depth in the picture at all. And
About when was this taken?
oh, good Lord, this is back in the early 1800s. Whoops, I gotta get the right one here. Those two buildings actually take up the space of the present ground block, what we call where the post office is. These pictures were all flat, and so there was no depth to anything, so it was very difficult to think that present building could fit in that area, but of course it did. This is showing the other side of Portland Street, and there's Rudy's place. You can see the other two buildings, and of course one of those is gone because of the Big U building is in there now, and we'll get to that in a few minutes there. This is the Fleetwood building, which had 3 stories. I think, was it the top story that had the
Masonic Temple, yeah.
the Masonic Temple was in the, I'm gonna have Steve give you a little history on the Masonic Temple while he's here. He's been talking with me about these different things, and tell him all the places where the Masonic Temple used to be.
The lodge started out in Hyde Park, over where, the banker used to live there. Arlett Smith's house. And it was actually Orange Lodge, number 36. And the first year, 1812, they worked under dispensation. They didn't have a charter. And they were chartered in 1813. And they met there until 1826, when the anti-Masonic period came about, and then they went dark. And after they came back to light in 1850, they started meeting in both Hyde Park and Morrisville. And then in 1863, they had the upper floor built, and they moved up there on the 3rd floor. And that burned in 1869. And it was reduced to 2. After it burned, they met in the vat down at the fiberboard plant that Francis showed you earlier. And after they decided to build another lodge, they contracted with the town of Morristown to build a 2nd story on the town hall that was on Main Street. And they went in there, and ex-Governor George Hendy also had offices in the front upstairs. So you had the Masonic Hall upstairs, Hendy's offices, and the town hall downstairs. And then in 1930, they bought Dr. Slayton's house on Portland Street, where the lodge now is. They cut the back half of it off. They hired the same architect and builder that Copley hired for People's Academy, which was Irv LeBaron. And he moved the back section of the house back, and that became Earl and Ann Morrill's house. And then they built the 2nd section of the Masonic Temple in 1930, dedicated it in December of 1930. And I believe that picture that you showed earlier with the people marching in Lower Main Street down by the Avalon Hotel, I believe that was the dedication procession. They went down around and came back up to the lodge. And the lodge has been where it is now ever since 1930. Matter of fact, they just celebrated their 200th anniversary.
We got pictures of those as we go along here. This is, once again, your, what we call the Green Dragon today, and the other building beside it. This has been, you'll notice it's changed quite a few times. This here is, interestingly enough, the post office is back in the same building that it originally was. It's interesting how things, the more they change, the more they stay the same. But that was a rather good-looking building back then. Here they're building the Centennial Block, and this was an interesting, there's an interesting thing about this building is when it was built, there was one man that fell off the top and got killed building the building, and when they had the last building, the guy got killed from jumping out the window. So there was one that died in the beginning and one died in the end.
What year was that, roughly?
1972 was the year that it burned.
No, the construction.
Oh, that's in the that's the early 1800s, or late 1800s, I should say.
1891.
There it is. You'll notice it was three stories high. We took this picture to, back then you see it, we didn't have the trucks that we had today. Notice the cement stand right in the middle of the street. And this is another view of, this is after the fire. And that's what it looks like today, a little different. And I'm sure that we're in the winter time. We'll have some other, this was a rather interesting picture back then. There's actually a filling station between the what we the Demars block today and the Starfire Jewelry. You can just see it there. Filling station's right in here.
There's a little cobbler shop in there too.
Yeah, there's a cobbler shop in the back, and then Peavine Graves had used to have a taxi service out there. This building on the corner is the Slayton House that's the
water and light.
Where the water and light was that Steve was talking about. I think we got some pictures of that. This is the Abishon, what we call the Abishon building today. It's being renovated at the present time. Gary Bourne just bought it, and they're renovating. They're doing going to do it, totally renovate that building.
Where is that?
Beside the TU building. The old Abishon building, the one that's got those big windows in the front that are all painted out. Well, there's the TU Theater. There was a interesting story about the TU Theater. The Bijou was the first theater that was built and I think we've got pictures of it here, but anyway, later on, the TQ Theater came along to put a little competition with the Bijou, and the original Bijou Theater was, let's see if I have it, well, let's look at this here, we'll get to that one. This is the TQ Market. You probably can remember when Brasso's was in there and a few others. That's what it looks like today. And this is going down Portland Street. there was a lot of people had a lot of discussion about if there was ever a diner in Morrisville. Well, there's the diner. There's a little diner down here and down beyond the Yost building, right here. That was someone bought it and moved it out of there, of course, but there's the Slayton house that Steve was talking about. That's the front. This is the section that was moved for the Morrill house. That once again shows the back side of the Slayton house. This here, they tore it down. They tore off the back part of the house, and now they're getting ready to put on there's the three sections of the building there that they're putting on, and that's still there today. Oh, and this is the so-called nephew block. Looks different. Looks a little different. I believe it was a Kelly block at the time. And this was that material that you see on the front of that is actually the same material that is presently there. It's just that it's been covered up and taken off and so on and so forth. And there's an interesting, actually there was an opening down here. There was a mortuary shop under this building. And M.B. Hoyt got his start in this building here as a mortician.
What year is that?
This here, once again, this is oh good Lord. This is the early somewhere in the 1900s. This is, all these streets were, yeah,
Right around there.
yeah. I don't know if many of you ever saw this building. This is the Hutchins. This is on the corner of, this is what's there now. That's Barber's real estate business. But that other building was there for many, many years and ended up, once again, most of these houses that were single houses at one time ended up as being apartment houses. And then back in the early 70s, there was so much trouble. They just got worse and worse, and we ended up having to take action to clean up the place and get them out of the area, unfortunately. I always like this picture. You can see the hand-shoveled snow. The road wasn't too wide, but nevertheless, they talk about the depth of snow today, but I'd say that there was a little of it back then too. Here we're talking about, this was the original Bijou Theater. And when they showed movies, of course, and everything, and then the Teague came in to give them a little competition. And interestingly enough, the way the history goes on this building is that they didn't want to stop showing pictures in this building while they were in competition with the Teague, so they actually built the brick building that's there now over the top of this one. and kept showing the movies. And then when the outside was all done, they tore the inside out and made the inside of the theater, and therefore they could keep on showing the movies. And of course the weight block is right beside it. Here's this looks. Now we're going down at the end of you can see the train station and the building next to it. And this is the weight block that was on the corner where Bourne's filling station is at the present time. Once again, it was an interesting building. We had quite a time with that. I became the health officer, and we had quite a problem because things began to get out of hand. We couldn't figure out why until we went to the third floor and found out that everybody was taking their garbage to the third floor and leaving it up there. The entire third floor was just covered in a way. That's what's there now. It looks a little different now than it did back then. This is looking up from Lower Main Street. Once again, you can see the buildings on the Yost building is there. Looks.
Wrong end store.
Yeah, it used to be the wrong end store. C.T. Morrill.
Yes, that's right.
Lem says, yeah. There was an interesting story about C.T. Morrill. He used to, that's the guy's farm and yard. C.T. Morrill, Mr. Sherman used to be a barber. He had his building is now torn down. It's beside the Woodbury building on Portland Street. But they used to go over to Sherman's to get shaved almost every morning. And C.T. was an avid smoker of good cigars. And I was just a boy in there one day, just a youngster with my dad. And Sherman would get him all wrapped up and put the cloth on and warm his face up, and C.T. would fall asleep. And Bob's grandfather would take one of the cigars out and put it on the bench. And when C.T. got done and he got ready to go home, Sherman would always give him a new cigar. Of course, finally he come to realize that he can get his own cigars back. But they used to do some weird things back then. Fun things that happened all the time. Now this was the railroad station. This is way back in the early days. And this house right here is actually Stanley Vincek's house that was moved. The reason that was moved is one day there was a little boy that lived in this house here, and he got to racing the train and fell down, and the train ran over his leg. He lost his leg out of it, so they decided it's best to move the house. I didn't have to race the train anymore. And there's this is when the train come in from other places, and they had to get fresh water because they had the steam engine. There's a water tank there, and somebody one day got sort of mixed up because there used to be a creamery up the roadways. And somebody put some milk in the watering trough, and they pumped it into the train. And about the time that the train got up to the corner, up there by 15A, and he started to get some power going, instead of the steam coming out, the milk was coming out, and it screwed the train all up. So they had quite a time, but they used to do some weird things back then. It's no different than it is today. There's the way it used to look. It looks pretty much like that today. There's the tannery, that's on the oxbow. And there was quite a bit of discussion about that at the time, because you can see the stack. And they used to, this tannery was, at the time, between this one and the tannery in Hyde Park, the Pages had one of the, actually the biggest tanning business in the whole country at the time. And they used to, in the wintertime especially, they would fire that boiler up, and the wind would come across, and it would take the embers up into the village, onto the roofs, and the houses would catch on fire. Because back then a lot of the roofs were made with shingle, wood cedar, and they'd catch on fire, so they had quite a time. And that's the same thing, one of the things that happened to the Randall Hotel was that at the time that the Randall was built, they didn't have a lot of water pressure in the village. And the Randall was so tall that when the roof caught on fire, the fire chief said, well, we'll have to wait till it burns down to the height of the ladder and then put it out. So it was just a little different than it is today. And eventually they got some water and got some pressure, but
Get rid of the tannery.
yeah, they got rid of the tannery. That happened in the 27 flood. Of course, that 27 flood actually did a lot of damage to all of this area. And this is a picture of that whole area down there. And here's the train track. It used to go out here to the tannery to get the goods. And this is Morrisville lumber, but it used to be Morse. George Morse, we used to be up in Woolcote, and he came down and bought this area and started the business down here. And you can see the areas that we had already talked about on the corner. This is actually a St. Johnsbury and Lake Champlain drawing of that area. We had a discussion of whether there was a turnstile there. There is. We found it after a while. Turntable there for the trains to turn around. And there's the lumber yard out in the back. Yeah, United Farmers. There's the other part of it. Here we are, 1911. The monument was put up. The interesting thing here too is the number of trees that were around here. And this is an early picture of looking up. There's the high school, and looking up the street. And there was a big discussion one time about whether or not there was a road that went down through and joined onto Elmore Street. These old pictures show it quite plain. But you notice the clear area up at, there's hardly any houses up there. Steve's is there, but.
Bowright's is there, isn't it? That's about the first one.
Yeah. And this is when they're started to build up on Maple Street. This was a parade. It was said in the News and Citizen that there were 250 horses there that day. And that house is actually the Yando house. And the other thing that's interesting here is that there was a big discussion, they wanted a cemetery. And you'll notice that the entrance to the Pleasant View Cemetery was off Washington Street. And it went up around and actually there's a road that still goes there. It's not, I don't believe it's used much.
So is that Cherry Street right down there next to the Yando house? Is that,
This is Maple Street.
so
right,
this long one's Maple Street? and
Yes.
that's Cherry right there where your finger is?
right here,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Now, the interesting thing about Washington Highway is a lot of people don't realize that Washington Highway actually went down where it is, the original road from the Layport Road actually went right across where all the buildings, where the Menage built the Jersey Heights and Fairwood and all that. The road actually, instead of it going where it is now, it went across to come down and join down on the Randolph Road and went up Cottage, went up went up Washington Highway to go to Elmore. And that was the original road, and then they moved the road to where it is now. Okay. Where do you think that house is? How about this one? Docky Wells' house on Maple Street. Alright? An interesting thing that happened here is, of course, once again, these houses were owned by one person. Now they're an apartment house. And most of all these buildings that went from one house to an apartment house, all the porches were taken off from them. And there was two reasons for them. One of them was there was a lot of lead paint left on them, and if you rented them, you'd have trouble with the renters with the lead paint. And the other one was that a lot of the people used to use the porches to accumulate their trash. And so consequently, they removed the porches so they wouldn't have the trash on them. Interestingly enough. Once again, we're going up the street. This is Maple Street again. That porch is still there, by the way, on that building. And this is the one on the corner. This is, I believe, Beeman, is it? Beeman owns it now. You'll notice this was a photographer, and they had a door. You can see him standing there in the corner. There was a door there that came out on the porch. And up on the top of the roof is, once again, is a glass window which he took pictures in, just like most all the photographers did that.
Is that any relation to Gidburn? You know?
I don't know. I have no idea. Once again, there's the build. That used to be Gid Burnham's house, didn't it?
Yes.
Now this is theirs. This was taken before they put the ramp on and so forth. We're going up the street now. There's the, once again, we're still moving up Maple Street. Is that
I'm not sure if that was,
That's
Yeah.
That's
Page?
Terry's house.
That's our house.
Yeah. Now, this house stayed pretty much the same except for the barn is gone. And that's been revamped. The barn is missing. There it is now. More today. Now this is an interesting picture. This is up where Uttons and Son lived, and they were great horse people. And
Is that Sheila Darrow's house?
that barn, of course, had a big cellar in it because there's a big bank. It goes right straight down. And notice the house there. And then this is what it looks like now. They changed the complete roof area and so forth. This house hasn't changed too much. That's what it looks like now. There's Miss Wing standing in her doorway. This, of course, is familiar to you all. So isn't this one? And this one is where Mrs. Talm used to be Lavagi's, and that's changed considerably. They've closed the porch in, and the garage on the side is gone. And this is the Ando house. I don't know if you remember this. This used to be Ellery Jones's house. And the woman one day, Ellery he fixed over the side on the left as an apartment. And she got excited one day the fire wasn't going fast enough, so she thought she had the kerosene. Instead she had a can of gasoline. Threw it in the stove, and of course it burned the house down. That's what it looks like now. Oh, Snowflake Bentley's place. And you probably remember it looking like this.
Yeah.
And then it's changed to this. And of course, Maple Street is a pretty good reason why they called it Maple Street. I think you don't begin to see the trees up there like they used to. This is the Bates place. Stoddard used to live in it. This is right across from where we are here. That is what it used to. You probably can remember it looking like that. This is at the Main Street.
1860s.
This is looking down Park Street. Once again, this is looking toward what they call Academy Park, which is the graded school building. Now we're going down Park Street. Once again, you'll notice that these buildings change as you go down the street. One of these houses was Dick Sargent's grandfather's place. I'm not sure which one it is. Dick probably can tell me. We're going down Park Street. Once again, these buildings are enormous in size back there. Sid Mander's house. This was moved from up on the corner where the school, where the skating rink is at the present time. They moved it, this was the Thomas place, and they moved it down Park Street, and that's where it is now.
Didn't they move that barn that was on the Thomas place over on Elmore Street, over to Arthur Solomon?
Yeah, you're gonna find it, I gave you a paper on the moved houses, and instead of going through it, I gave you something you can take home to look at. They moved a lot of these houses around. Once again, we're at the end of Park Street here. You're familiar with this, now that's Garbutt's house. It was moved to, that house was where the, who's the veterinarian used to live next door? Walker. It was on the Walker lot, and they moved it so that they could build a Walker lot. This is where Dick works now. He takes care of the cobbler shop. There we are. That building has disappeared. There's the bridge. Looks a little different today. This is the Wells Goddard place on Bridge Street that had a fire, and this is what it looks like today. Well, something like that. This is your railroad bridge before they took that one down. You almost think they couldn't get two cars through there at the same time, but once again, we're going down. Yeah, there's Bridge Street. This house hasn't changed. And these houses going down Bridge Street are pretty much the same. They're enormous in size. I still can't get over there's Lakeside Garage. This is the old, this was one of the when they built that bridge, it supposedly was the longest one in Vermont at the time. And there's what's left of the park. This is Lower Bridge Street. 27 flood took that right out. This is the Bates house. This was moved from the Noyce block up here. Septimus Robinson was the first principal that lived in it. She lived in it for about 40 for all her life. This here was on the corner of Portland and Congress Street, and it was Henry Ferris moved it down here and put brick on it as an apartment house. That's the Breyer house. Do you remember the telephones used to 436 was a telephone number. You used to dial it, and I can remember as a kid we'd dial too long and short, or too long and too short, and then you'd go to speak to somebody and you'd hear everybody picking up the phone. Party line. We're going up the main street here. Here's the building that the old town hall, and Steve talked about adding the 12 feet to it on the top so they could have a place to meet. And there it is. And it's amazing today when you walk by there to think that size of a building could be in that area, but it certainly was. Once again, this is just another look up the street. Oh, this is the first congregational church, and then they added the bottom to it and changed the front. And this was Eloise Stafford's house. And this was looking from the schoolhouse down the main street. This is up by the golf course looking down on, and that's the Park Street. And that's, this building right on the left is Sharon Green, where Sharon Green has presently got her office. There's Academy Park, what they called it. Notice the bandstand there. These are some of the people that went to school at this People's Academy here.
Now, that was the second building,
That's the
correct?
second building. The first one was called Poor People's Academy, and it was moved down on Pleasant Street. The interesting thing about the original school, about so-called Poor People's Academy, is that there was a gentleman in town that wanted to have a school, and some of the other well-known, educated people didn't think it was necessary. And he got, in a sense, rather vile about the whole thing, and he built the darn thing himself. Built the school himself, and then they realized that it was, the other people in town realized how important it was, and actually they became the ones that were teaching in the school itself. And the only reason they called it the Poor People's Academy is that the person that built it was poor, and they called it the Poor People's Academy. Once again, here's the second building with the grade school, half of it in the back. This is the Advent Christian Church when it wasn't hooked together. Now there's the bullpen, so-called bullpen, called the Dorset House. Wasn't it called?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, the Dorset House it was called. Oh, this is a rather interesting picture.
It's a Dodge, actually.
In 73 or 73, they're putting in the storm sewer, getting rid of taking the regular water out of the regular sewer line, and there was a catch basin in front of my house, and Bob Jones lived across the street, and the engineer decided that he wasn't going to put one back there. And it so happened that it started to rain one day, and of course all the water came down Olive Street and ended up at the end of the street. So we put this sign up, and ended up that the next week we got the catch basin put back in the street.
How did you get the duck to go?
Well, it was rather interesting. We got the duck all right, but we got it straightened around anyway.
What does the sign say?
No fishing or duck hunting?
This is burning of the bullpen here.
What year was that?
Oh, boy. I don't remember, but I do remember that Bud LeClaire came over to my house and we polished off a bottle of scotch watching it burn. I do remember that. Anyway, this was the building right across from the. Yeah. This is what it looks like from my house now compared to what it used to look like.
Looks better.
There's the old police station and firehouse. There's the Vinsec house on the Oxbow. That's Mary, what used to be. Is it still Mary West? Yeah. There's Ward's Pond, what used to be Ward's Pond. And Boomhauer Place on the Randolph Road. That's long gone. That went in the 70s, or 60s, late 60s. And of course, this is what they used to roll the snow on the roads with. There's the original Catholic Church. This is Lily Wagon down in Cadiz Falls. That's the scene for Bridge Street. looking down Congress Street. The house looks pretty much the same. That was Joe Trombley's. This was the Cadiz Falls flood area. When they had the 27 flood, there used to be a bridge that came across here. And of course, the water was, this was the one up at Penny Bridge. J. Smalley and Company. Now this is Lake Lamoille. This is going down the street's a little smaller back then. That's the sign of Indian Joe and Molly. There's a whole history on those two. There's the Dugway. And I guess there wasn't too much traffic back then. That's the Layport Farm, Layport Dairy.
Is that up in Tillman?
Layport Road. Farm Resort. There's the what they call the Boa Egypt area. A lot of you used to be able to go down North River Street and keep on going, and you'd end up following the river and going into Cadiz Falls. And of course, in 1906, when they built the dam at Cadiz Falls, this disappeared. And that's what it looks like from further away. Well, this is Bates' house. That's what it, and then it goes like this. Here it is here. That's where we are today. And this was the News and Citizen in Hyde Park. Actually, it moved from Hyde Park to Morrisville. That's just a picture of it in Hyde Park. And there's Clyde himself. Yeah. Yes.
But I want to thank the library for giving us the space tonight, and to just reiterate that we've, throughout the 20th century, always had someone in town that was sort of identified as our town historian. In the early 20th century, that of course was Anna Mower. Many of you remember her, the teacher and the author of the book of Morrisville history that we still reference. Then in the 1970s and 80s, of course, we had Bob Hagerman, who updated that and republished Anna Mower's book and his own book under the title Morristown 2 times. You may have that book at home. And in our own time, we have Francis. And so for that reason, we would like to give Francis tonight a little commemorative plaque, which we're calling the Anna Mower Award. Oops, sorry. And this is from the copper, from the steeple, from the church steeple. Anna Mower Award given to Francis in gratitude of a lifetime of Morrisville history. And I want to thank Todd Thomas at the town for coming up with the copper. He called me up, he heard about this and said, I have it and I've had it fashioned into a plaque. And I said, great. And then I took it to the Critters and Things pet store / engraving store to get a plaque put on the back. And I just want to thank them because they said, no, we don't want any pay. Not only do we like the Historical Society, but more than that, she said, we like Francis. So thanks to Francis, and thank you all for coming tonight. And we have some cider and some cookies at the back if you want to have a little snack before you head out.